is the blowing of the shofar. That's in the Torah itself. But as far as the Torah is concerned, there's only a mitzvah of blowing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. And yet, as you know, if you've been coming to davening, hopefully, from the start of Rosh Chodesh Elul, from the beginning of the month of the Elul, we blow the shofar every day, except on Shabbos. And where is that from? So it's important to understand that there's a very big difference between the blowing of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah and the blowing of the shofar in the month of Elul. The blowing of shofar on Rosh Hashanah is a Torah commandment. The Torah itself says you must do that. The blowing of the shofar during the month of Elul is not even an obligation. It really started off as a custom, and the custom eventually became a halacha because of its widespread practice. So why do we blow the shofar during the month of Elul? So the reason is because the 40 days from Rosh Chodesh Elul through Yom Kippur are called days of special grace, special mercy, special divine love for the Jewish people. Why is that so? Because Rosh Chodesh Elul was the day that Moshe Rabbeinu went up the third and final time to Mount Sinai for 40 days to get the second tablets after the Chet of the golden calf. And what day did he come down with the second tablets? He came down with the second tablets on Yom Kippur itself. Now there is a chicken and egg issue here, and that is what is the relation, which means there's a certain aspect of Yom Kippur that we sometimes don't pay attention to. And that is, Yom Kippur was the day that Moshe Rabbeinu brought down the second Luchos. So Yom Kippur is a day of Kabbalah Satorah. In some ways, it's even a greater day of Kabbalah Satorah than Shavuos. Because on Shavuos, those Luchos were broken on the 17th of Tammuz. What we got on Yom Kippur was never...
They were broken on which day?
Well, the 17th of Tammuz, meaning 40 days after Shavuos is when Moshe came down. Now, the chicken and egg problem that I'm alluding to is this. Why is Yom Kippur the Day of Atonement? Is it because since that was the day that God gave us the second Luchos, thereby forgiving the golden calf, that made it the Day of Atonement? Meaning the receiving of the Luchos made Yom Kippur the Day of Atonement? Or the other way around, since Yom Kippur is the Day of Forgiveness, that became the day that God gave us the second Luchos. Meaning, which comes first? Is the receiving of the Luchos the reason for Yom Kippur? Or is Yom Kippur the reason for the receiving of the Luchos? Right, that's an interesting question. There are different opinions on that. But be it as it may, that entire 40-day period from Rosh Chodesh Elul till Yom Kippur are days of divine grace and divine forgiveness. And when we have divine grace and divine forgiveness, the ability to do tshuva is enhanced because God is waiting for you. So the purpose of blowing the shofar during the month of Elul, and later we'll talk about the Rosh Hashanah blowing itself, but the purpose of is to be the alarm clock to remind us to do tshuva. As the Rambam writes, generally, the Rambam says, one of the meanings of shofar, there are many other meanings, but one of the meanings of shofar is Uru Yeshenim Mishinaschem. That means, wake up, sleepyheads, from your slumber. Quite literally, it's an alarm clock to make us realize that we have to do tshuva. But again, as I've said many times, Avodas HaTshuva is not about being sad and despondent and heartbroken. It's about the joy of renewal, the joy of forgiveness. The fact that you can fix things. Things are not broken forever. What you broke, you can fix. And what you are today is not subject to what you were yesterday. And what you can be tomorrow is not limited by what you are today. So, tshuva should not be something depressing, although one should regret their sins, to be sure. But it's not about depression, and it's not about self-loathing, and it's not about putting yourself down. It's about recognizing that God gives us tremendous opportunities to try to make things good again. And that's really Rav Kook. Rav Kook writes this all the time. You know, we had last week, not last week, this week, we actually had 2 yard sites, only one of which was commemorated in our yeshiva. The yahrzeit that was commemorated is the 4th of Elul, which was the great yahrzeit of Rav Meir Simcha of Devinsk, who was the author of Ohr Somayach, and our whole yeshiva is named in honor of Rav Meir Simcha of Devinsk. And you'll recall that Monday we had a program, and I was privileged at least to give a little drasha about Rav Meir Simcha, and the truth is there's a lot more that could be said and should be said about Rav Meir Simcha. But interestingly enough, the day before Rav Meir Simcha's yahrzeit, Rav Meir Simcha's yahrzeit is the 4th of Elul. On the 3rd of Elul, although he died later, but in terms of a day, 3rd of Elul was the yahrzeit of Rav Kook. Again, for reasons that I don't want to get into right now, in the mainstream yeshiva world, Rav Kook is often not honored and celebrated as much as he should be. So I will at least be a partially dissenting voice as to what a great, great man he was in so many ways. And one of Rav Kook's many books is called Ohr Somayach, The Lights of Tshuva. These are really notebooks that were published after his death. And his major theme is that far too often people look at tshuva as laborious, as something that really saps your energy, something that depresses you, when in reality the message of tshuva should be uplifting and optimistic and hopeful and happy. That's one of Rav Kook's main themes. By the way, as a little aside, since we did not give any hespedim to Rav Kook, I want to tell you one story about Rav Kook. That's quite a beautiful story in many, many ways. Rav Kook was a Rav in Lithuania. He was a Rav in Lithuania. He was a Talmud of the great Volozhina Yeshiva. He was very close to the Nitziv, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin for 50 years. And he became, and in his 20s, he became a Rav in Lithuania. But because of his great love for Eretz Yisrael, he came to Eretz Yisrael in the early part of the 20th century, which when Israel was really under British, well, initially under Ottoman Empire, and then after World War I under British mandate. Rav Kook became the Rav of a fishing village known as Yaffo. Now it's interesting, Tel Aviv wasn't invented yet. Tel Aviv was not built until the 20s. So all there was Yaffo. Now Yaffo is a very, very ancient city. Yaffo is mentioned in Tanakh. Yaffo was the main port in the land of Israel. And if you remember, Yonah the prophet, when he's trying to escape from God, whatever that means, takes a ship from Yaffo, the port of Yaffo. So in those days, there was no Tel Aviv. There was Yaffo, and Yaffo was not a very religious city, and it was not a big city anyway. But Rav Kook was the Rav of Yaffo, a small Rabbanut. He was young, and he was working and helping the secular Jews. But at some point, Rav Kook decided he wanted to broaden his horizons a little bit. And he wanted to undertake a journey in the Galil up north to visit a lot of the non-religious kibbutzim and moshavim that had been starting. And many of these kibbutzim were not only non-religious, they were very much anti-religious. We're talking about Shomer HaTzair, which were really communists. It was worse even then, as hard as it might be to believe. These were really, really anti-religious kibbutzim that wanted nothing to do with Yiddishkeit. And Rav Kook shows up unannounced and uninvited. And Rav Kook knew he couldn't eat the food there. So for Shabbos, he brought bread, challah, and wine. That's it. So he goes to the kibbutz, he's a rabbi, etc., and he makes one request of the leadership of the kibbutz. Would it be possible to organize a minyan for Friday night? We could daven together. The guy said, no, we don't do minyans here. So Rav Kook daven b'yechidus. He sits in a dining room. Now imagine the scene. This is a big communal dining room with long tables. The food is treif. They may have been serving pork. The food is treif. There was no television then, but radios are blaring. Sewing machines. They do have a Friday night communal meal because it's the end of the week. It's a weekend meal. But, there are sewing machines operating. There are radios blaring. Treif food being served. And Rav Kook, this rabbi with a shtreimel, is sitting there eating his bread and eating his wine, and he's schmoozing with the members of the kibbutz about what are they doing, how is their life going, what are their goals, what are their dreams, and he's just talking to them listening to them. He didn't even make, he made Kiddush for himself. He didn't even make Kiddush for them because they didn't want it. And then the next morning, he asks the same question, could we have a minyan for Shabbos? And they say no. Same thing happens. And then they have a third meal, not because it's Suda Shlishis, but the kibbutz had a late afternoon meal. Same thing. And the whole time, Rav Kook did not give one Devar Torah. Sounds very strange. He did not give one Musar Shmuz. He did not give one criticism. He's simply talking to them and getting to know them and making them feel that he respects their endeavors and he admires their devotion to build up Eretz Yisrael. So at the end of Shabbos is finally over, and Rav Kook says, I'm very, very happy to have spent the weekend with you, or Shabbat with you, and I hope that next time we could come, we'll be able to eat together soon. That's all he said. And then he left. That very night, the head of the kibbutz said, we're koshering the kitchen. We're making the kitchen kosher. All the food here is going to be kosher from now on. And he said, if this rabbi would have given one word of criticism that we're eating treif, we would have thrown him out right then and there. But he didn't criticize us. He loved us. He cared about us. He validated us. So we should meet him halfway. So the kibbutz did not become Shomer Shabbos. It was a non-religious kibbutz, but they were a kosher kibbutz in terms of food. It's a remarkable story because it really tells you that the way you reach a person, the way you influence a person, the way you change a person is not necessarily pointing out all of their defects, all of their deficiencies. But sometimes just by validating them, by being machshiv them, by understanding that what they're doing is also good and worthwhile, that creates a tremendous incentive. So Rav Kook was criticized for this. There were many, many rabbis, and to this day Rav Kook is controversial, precisely because of stories like this. Because they said, hey, these people are treif, these people are communists, these people are anti-Hashem. You should denounce them. You should put them in cherem. You should say how bad they are. And there was such a shita. And we see this today. Rav Kook had a very different shita. Rav Kook said you reach people by love and validation. And then they're going to want to connect to what you're standing for as well. It's a tremendous, tremendous lesson. Now I want to give you another story about another gadol who was ideologically not Zionistic like Rav Kook, but he was a great, great gadol in the mainstream Litvische world. That is Rav Chaim Ozer Grodzinski. Rav Chaim Ozer Grodzinski was in Vilna, and the Chafetz Chaim died in 1933. So after the Chafetz Chaim died, Rav Chaim Ozer was considered to be the real gadol hador. When I say gadol hador, you have to understand what I mean exactly. I don't just mean he was like the greatest Torah scholar, which he was, or he was certainly up there. But he also was in charge of all of the problems that Klal Yisrael were facing. I mean, remember, he was around during the beginning of the Holocaust. He died in 1941. He was the one who spearheaded, with an ingenious plan, to move the yeshivas to Shanghai to get them out of the war zone. He handled millions and millions of dollars of tzedakah that were being passed through. He was the gadol hador, not only in Torah learning, but in everything. He was kind of keeping the Jewish people around and alive during a very, very difficult time. My own Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Ruderman, Rav Yitzchak Ruderman, who founded the Ner Israel Yeshiva in Baltimore. Rav Ruderman died in 1987, if I remember correctly. But he knew all of these great gedolim from when he was young. So he described once what it was like to going to Rav Chaim Ozer's house. Because yeshiva boys who were in Vilna, they would like to visit Rav Chaim Ozer. He was such a great, distinguished gadol. So he says this following. He says, Rav Chaim Ozer's dining room, he lived on a second-story apartment in Vilna, and Rav Chaim Ozer's dining room was a very, very long table, and there were people seated on either side of the table. And each of them, like say 20 people on this side, 20 people on this side, and each of them was like the people, like those geniuses who play 20 games of chess at the same time. Like one person was asking him a shayla in halacha, another person was asking for money, another person had a personal problem, and they all were talking, one after the other, and he was learning and writing something else, and he was listening to everything that was going on, and he was answering every question. And every time somebody stopped talking because they figured he wasn't hearing them, he would say, go on, I hear, you're saying this and this and this and this. And he would just answer like a million questions. I think his Rebbetzin was on the phone. Not too many people had phones in Vilna in those days, but he had a phone. He needed to have a phone. And he was commenting on her phone conversation. So he was a truly brilliant, brilliant man, but a very, very kind heart. So the story goes, there still is an organization in America called the Joint Distribution Committee. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. They're in charge, essentially, of raising money and distributing money to refugees or poor Jewish families in Europe. And the Joint Distribution Committee was operating even during World War II. Now, obviously, they didn't have access to Nazi-occupied Europe. But Lithuania was going back and forth, and there was a time, like that's how Rav Chaim Ozer got the yeshivas out of Lithuania during a few months when Lithuania was not Nazi-occupied. It was independent. So the Joint came in and was going to distribute money to the poor Jewish families that were starving, really, because of the war. And the American representative of the Joint in Vilna was a physician from Cincinnati, whose name was Dr. Samuel Schmidt. He was an MD, but he was there. And he had to meet, since he had several $1 million to distribute, he had to meet with Rav Chaim Ozer to determine how to give the money. And Dr. Schmidt was not religious. He was a Machal Shabbos, etc., but he was there for the Joint. So he's meeting with Rav Chaim Ozer. They're talking about the logistics of where you give the money, how you give the money, how it should be distributed, and they're working out a plan. And somehow, towards the end of the conversation, Rav Chaim Ozer takes his two hands and he puts them over Dr. Schmidt's hands. And he says, Dr. Schmidt, do you mind if we're a little less formal and I call you Reb Shmuel? Now, Reb is not the same as rabbi, but Reb is a title of honor that you give to a distinguished Jew. You don't just call him Shmuel, you call him Reb Shmuel. Do you mind if I call you Reb Shmuel? So for some reason, this moved Dr. Schmidt tremendously, and he started crying a little bit. And he said, Rabbi, I don't deserve for you to call me Reb. I don't keep Shabbos. I don't keep kosher. I'm not a religious Jew. So you can call me Dr. Schmidt because I earned the MD. An MD I am, so I can be Dr. Schmidt. But Reb Shmuel is a title that you give to a good Jew. And he said, I'm not a good Jew. So Rav Chaim Ozer said to him, in surprise, what do you mean you're not a good Jew? You left the comfort of the United States to go to a war zone. You put your life in danger because you want to help starving Jews with resources that can give them a meal. Do you think that doesn't count in God's eyes? Do you think that's not righteous behavior? Do you think you're not a good Jew? Of course, you deserve to be called Reb Shmuel. Dr. Schmidt recounted this in his autobiography that he wrote after the war. And he says, that very day, he left Rav Chaim Ozer's house, and he resolved to start putting on tefillin, to keep kosher, and to be a shomer Shabbos. So again, I hope you can see the obvious connection between the Rav Kook story and the Rav Chaim Ozer story. Two stories, two very different personalities. Two personalities who, in many, many philosophical issues, were not necessarily in alignment. But at the same time, Rav Chaim Ozer didn't give anybody a Musar Shmuz, wasn't there to criticize them, wasn't there to show them how defective they are, but to build them up. And when you build somebody up, they rise to the challenge. And in many, many ways, I think of those two stories as the model of how, if you want to be a positive influence on somebody, how do you really influence people to become what they should become? Dr. Schmidt and this kibbutz became religious, the kibbutz didn't become religious, but became kosher through the love that Rav Kook showed. Dr. Schmidt became a Shomer Shabbos through the respect that the great Rav Chaim Ozer showed him. Now, Rav Chaim Ozer was not a professional kiruv person. Rav Chaim Ozer was not really involved in outreach. That wasn't his particular line of work. And in fact, he was not, in spite of his genius and his kindness, he was actually not even such a great speaker publicly. He didn't even like to speak publicly. He was not a charismatic speaker. He didn't have the gimmicks that, unfortunately, well, whatever, that's another story, that we sometimes have in the Jewish outreach world. But what there was, what he did have was a genuine love and respect for Jews who are trying to do good things in the world. And when you have that type of love and respect, you can be a very, very potent and strong influence on people to bring them in a very, very good direction. Okay, so that's a little bit, again, Rav Chaim Ozer's yard site is an Av, so it's not relevant now, but I did want to mention Rav Kook a little bit, because Rav Kook's yard site was not observed here, and it was the 3rd of Elul, the day before. The great Rav Meir Simcha was also an extremely kind-hearted person. In fact, people make a big mistake when they associate Rav Kook with Zionism. He was much, much more than Zionism. There were many, many other things that he addressed besides Zionism. In fact, if you want to know what makes him really controversial, it's not Zionism. What made him controversial is his take on rebelliousness. He lived at a time of great social unrest. Many young people were leaving Yiddishkeit. They were joining communism, Zionism, nationalism, socialism, many, many different movements. Haskalah, seeking secular avenues. Reform, although reform was not really a big draw for the younger people, but reform was growing as well. So most of the rabbis of his generation looked at all of these deviancies, and they basically said, oy vey, this is a real tragedy, but we really have no way of stopping the hemorrhaging, so who's ever lost is lost, and we got to concentrate on the religious Jews who remain. That was the theory. Rav Kook not only took the position that we have to actively engage in those who are leaving Yiddishkeit. I mean, that's like kiruv, which is, that itself would have been innovative, but that would be something that's not controversial today. I think everybody says that. But the other point is much deeper. Rav Kook saw in rebellion, something that actually was holy. He said, young people are idealistic, and they're passionate, and they're seeking to avoid superficiality and rote. And if they see in regular Judaism that people are just going through the motions, and they don't have passion, and they don't have integrity, and they don't have excitement, and they don't have spiritual renewal, they're just going through the motions, then they're going to look for that type of inspiration elsewhere, and it may be very tragic that they're going in the wrong way. But Rav Kook pointed out, the message of rebellion is not only a message of failure of those who are leaving Judaism, it's an indictment of Judaism itself, the way it's practiced. And therefore we have to learn from them, meaning them, those who rebel, about how to bring a greater passion in our Judaism. Now that was very controversial, because essentially Rav Kook put the blame on the defections, not on the defectors, but on the type of superficial Judaism that they were defecting from, which was the traditional Orthodox Judaism, right? And yet Rav Kook pointed out that there were weaknesses in it. There was superficiality. There was going through the motions. There was not thinking about a connection with God. Right? That's the problem. A person is so fixated on the details of halacha, which are important, that they sometimes don't think about the bigger picture. So if you want to know what made Rav Kook particularly controversial, it was ideas like that. More so. In fact, the Zionism stuff is almost an outgrowth of that, where he saw secular Zionists and he was willing to validate what they were doing. It's all connected to his idea of what might be called holy rebelliousness. Now again, Rav Kook himself, I mean, this is so obvious. Rav Kook himself was a fully Orthodox rabbi. Rav Kook himself, if you ever saw a picture of him, he looked like every other Lithuanian rabbi with a beard and a shtreimel. Rav Kook learned every minute that he could learn. Rav Kook was a baki in Bavli, Yerushalmi, Shulchan Aruch, Rambam, Kabbalah, which many Gedolim weren't conversant in, but Kabbalah. So he knew everything. He was not coming from ignorance. He was not coming from, I'm okay, you're okay, where a person is not rooted in Torah learning. He was very, very deeply rooted in Torah learning, but even so, he understood that challenges come into the world under different guises. And we can't just have the attitude that those who are leaving Judaism are just wrong and we're right. We have to use this as an occasion for a cheshbon hanefesh, in our own cheshbon hanefesh. So again, interesting point, as they say. Obviously, you probably don't hear about Rav Kook that often, and it is an issue, meaning in the Dati Leumi yeshivot, they talk about Rav Kook more. In the Haredi yeshivot, they talk about Rav Kook less. But I do want to point out, Rav Kook was both the Shadchan and the Mesader Kedushin for Rebbe Yosef, who was a great Litvish Gadol. And whenever anybody said anything negative about Rav Kook in the presence of Rebbe Yosef, thinking Rebbe Yosef will just agree with it because Rav Kook is Rav Kook, Rebbe Yosef would kick them out of his house. And he would say, you don't know about whom you're talking about. You have no idea who Rav Kook was. Do we accept all of his philosophy? Do we accept all of his premises? Maybe not, maybe not. So what? There's plenty of machloksim among Gedolei Yisrael. Machlokas, Rashi, and Tosfos. I mean, whatever it is. But both of them are great. Both of them are Gedolim. All of these different opinions. So to allow a disagreement on a particular point based on your tradition, to impugn the kavod and greatness of a person is totally no good. In fact, Chazal say that a person that speaks disrespectfully about Talmidei Chachamim may lose his olam haba for that. That's a pretty big crime, right? To speak against Gedolim and the like. No, that doesn't mean there can't be disagreements. Sure, there are disagreements. I mean, as you know, there are disagreements whether we're allowed to have a state of Israel. Satmar Rav, Rebbe took the position that we're not allowed to have a state of Israel until the coming of Mashiach. The whole state is a forbidden state, even if it would have been totally religious. Not because they're non-religious, even if the Gedolim would be in charge of the Knesset and everything else. Satmar Rebbe says not allowed to have a state. Other Gedolim disagree with that. We have to respect both of them, just to understand that this is a machlokes. Okay, but be this it may, going back to Elul, the purpose of Elul is to awaken us to tshuva, and as Rav Kook pointed out, tshuva is really very, very joyous. So it's interesting that we do blow shofar every day of Elul, except we don't blow on Shabbos, obviously, because even Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos we don't blow, it's a kal v'chomer Elul. But there's another day we don't blow. We don't blow the shofar on Erev Rosh Hashanah, meaning the day before Rosh Hashanah, we stop blowing the shofar. So the question is, why do we stop blowing the shofar Erev Rosh Hashanah? So the classic reason that's given, although it actually doesn't apply this year so much, is that you want to make a break between optional blowing and mandatory blowing. On Rosh Hashanah, it is mandatory blowing. You're obligated to blow shofar. During Elul, it's technically optional because it's only a minute. Now, if you were to continuously blow shofar into Rosh Hashanah, you might make the mistake that Elul is as significant as the Rosh Hashanah blowings. So in order to make a demarcation between optional and mandatory, we have a break. Now, Lamaisa, that reason actually does not fit this year, because this year you have a break anyway, because the first day of Rosh Hashanah is Shabbos, we don't blow shofar. So even if we were to blow shofar on Erev Rosh Hashanah, we would have a break. Okay, but nevertheless, we make it the same as all the years. There's a parallel case where we also have a similar idea, that you want to make a break between the optional and the obligatory, and that is Erev Pesach. You know, there are different customs. When do people stop eating matzah before Pesach? There is a concept, you stop eating matzah before Pesach, so you'll have more enthusiasm for the matzah of the Seder. Now, Chabad and other people, they actually stop eating a month before Pesach, Purim. Other people stop Rosh Chodesh Nisan. But none of that is halacha. The halacha is you can eat matzah until Erev Pesach in the morning, meaning at the crack of dawn, Erev Pesach, you cannot eat matzah until nightfall, which is actually very interesting. That means matzah becomes prohibited before chametz becomes prohibited, because you're allowed to eat bread on Erev Pesach till 4 hours into the day. So you can eat bread at a time when you're not allowed to eat matzah. That's from the crack of dawn of Erev Pesach. But once again, part of the reason why you don't eat matzah is to differentiate between the optional eating of matzah the whole year and the obligatory eating of matzah. So it's very similar to Erev Pesach. Okay, so now I want to share with you a story from the Munkacher Rebbe. Now, Munkach is a town in Hungary, and Munkach is known actually for a very extreme anti-Zionism, much more than Satmar. So you could even say that Munkach anti-Zionism makes Satmar look like Mizrahi. It's really amazing. Munkach was very, very extreme, but that's not the purpose of this story. This is a story that illustrates another point, and that is the Munkacher Rebbe had a grandson that he was basically raising the grandson. And he loved that grandson with a great passion. The grandson would sit on his lap the whole day as he'd be meeting with people. And the grandson especially loved when his Zaidi would blow shofar. So in Elul, he would go to shul and the Zaidi would blow shofar. And after the Zaidi blowed shofar every day, the grandson would say in Yiddish, "Can you give me one more tekiah, one more blow, Zaidi, one more blow?" And Zaidi would always give an extra blow. So it came Erev Rosh Hashanah. And of course, we don't blow shofar Erev Rosh Hashanah. So the boy went to his Zaidi, like a little boy, and he said once again, "Zaidi, can you give me one blow?" So the Zaidi said, "Well, it's Erev Rosh Hashanah. We're not supposed to blow the shofar." And the child started crying and sobbing, "Zaidi, Zaidi, please, just one blow, one blow. All I want is one blow. Can't you give me one blow?" So finally, the Rebbe broke down, and the Rebbe blew the shofar once, a quick tekiah, and that was it. Next day is Rosh Hashanah, and the Rebbe speaks before tekiyat shofar, and the Rebbe starts crying. The Rebbe says, "I committed a serious avera yesterday." Although it's not, I wouldn't say it that serious, but for his madrega it was serious. He says, the halacha is that we don't blow shofar Erev Rosh Hashanah. But my grandson begged me and begged me and begged me, and he kept on saying, one blow, can't you give me one blow? And out of the love for my grandson, I gave him one blow, even though I wasn't supposed to do it. So he says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you love us, you love the Jewish people, even more than I love my grandson. It says in davening every day, blow the great shofar for our redemption. Shofar is a sign of Mashiach. Can't you give us one little blow of your shofar? The shofar that brings the geula. Yes, I know we're not deserving. I know we're not worthy. I know it may not be the right time, but I did it for my grandson, even though I shouldn't have. Because my love conquered all the other considerations. Can you, Hashem, conquer whatever barriers there are and give us one shofar blow? Tikah b'shofar gadol l'cheirusenu. Give us the great shofar blast to bring our redemption. And this is the way that he was ma'orer, he aroused the whole congregation to pray for Geula, for pray for Mashiach. Shofar is a very, very rich, multi-symbolic mitzvah because it refers to so many different things, totally different ideas. It talks about awakening us to tshuva, the alarm clock. It reminds us of the shofar of Mashiach. It reminds us of receiving the Torah at Sinai, where the shofar blast was there. It's a reminder of resurrection of the dead. And the fact that it's a ram's horn is a reminder to Hashem Kavyachol of the Akedas Yitzchak, that he should remember the merit of Avram and Yitzchak, who Avram was willing to sacrifice his son, and Yitzchak was willing to die. All of these things. Rav Saadia, maybe we'll go over it. My guess is you probably will go over it with other teachers as well. Rav Saadia Gaon gives 10 different symbols for the meaning of shofar. We'll go over it. The truth is, in every art scroll, Rosh Hashanah Machzor, it actually gives you the reasons, and it's very worthwhile to look at. It's like a page or a page and a half. It's not a long thing, but it's very good basic knowledge to understand the mitzvah of blowing the shofar. Okay? So anyway, I wish you all a Chodesh Tov, and I hope that your learning this month should continue to progress in a positive way, and all of us should be zocher to a kesiva v'chasima.
Thank you for listening to this Ohr Somayach production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.